up, you lazy bastard. Time to make a new video, it's been ages. Beep, beep, beep.
Oh, do I have to? It's only August. I could really use a couple more months' sleep.
No. Rise and shine, time to get your fat ass into gear.
I really need to get another, less rude alarm clock. The early 90s truly was the era of the platformer. That might seem like a fairly obvious sort of thing to say, given that Mario and Sonic basically ruled the world back then, but if you weren't a gamer in the 8 and 16-bit eras, you might not realise just how prevalent the platformer genre was. It seemed that every second game coming out was a platformer, and that's really not an exaggeration. In fact, it might be an understatement. I remember One Games magazine bemoaning the fact that of the 12 upcoming titles featured in their preview section that month, 9 of them were platformers. There were just too damn many of the things. Even if they'd all been good, and that sure as hell was not the case, you'd still get bored of them through sheer lack of variety. And why were they so prevalent? A few reasons, I guess. They are accessible, easy to understand and to market, and there were established formulas for what made a good platformer, which makes it all the more baffling why so many of them were terrible. But the main reason, I'd say, is that a platformer at that stage in video game history was the best possible vehicle for a new or existing character, especially one that was aimed at children, which at the time were the main target market of the gaming industry. A good platform game, after all, was like something approaching an interactive cartoon, and if the star of this cartoon proved to be particularly successful, you didn't just have a memorable and enduring character on your hands, you had a mascot. And a good mascot could carry an entire series of games, or even a generation of hardware. And so it was with Sonic and Mario, the mascot kings of their respective castles. Many pretenders to the throne rose up. Cool Spot, Bubsy the Bobcat, Awesome Possum, Earthworm Jim, Aero the Acrobat, Wally the Walrus who liked to wax lyrical. Only one of those is made up, and I bet you can't tell which one. And then there was Ristar. No Sega character had managed to topple Sonic from his lofty role as the company's main mascot, but there were a few elements that gave Ristar as good a chance as most, which honestly was pretty much zero anyway. For one thing, Ristar was himself a Sega creation. For another, he had a lineage that could be traced back directly to the spiky blue speed demon whose throne he hoped to usurp. You see, Ristar was loosely based on a design for a rabbit with prehensile ears that had been created during Sega's first attempts to come up with a mascot to rival Mario. Sonic turned out to be the winning design on that occasion, but the idea of a character that could reach out and grab things would be revisited in the future. Incidentally, there seems to be some confusion as to whether Ristar was actually created by the same people who developed Sonic the Hedgehog, namely Sonic Team. As far as I can tell, the two games were developed by separate teams within Sega, although some of Ristar's developers went on to join Sonic Team for their next project, Nights into Dreams, on the Saturn. In any case, Ristar was poised to be Sonic's next big thing. I don't think anyone expected him to really supplant Sonic as Sega's mascot, but he definitely seemed on track to become a rival, albeit a friendly one. Certainly I don't think Sega ever planned to replace Sonic with Ristar. They knew when they were onto a good thing, but a little friendly competition can often be a good thing as well. In any case, the hype factor was high, and back in the day I definitely bought into it. In retrospect though, I think I was one of the few who did. Sega's marketing department desperately wanted people to care deeply about Ristar, but not many people did. It was all to do with the timing. Ristar was released in early 1995, by which time the Mega Drive was practically a fossil. The Saturn was months away, and it was clear to everyone that a new age of console gaming was on the horizon. A traditional 16-bit platformer, even one that had the full weight of Sega's marketing behind it, wasn't going to get pulses racing. And as it happens, thanks to some mediocre reviews, I never did bother playing Ristar back in the day. Time passed and Ristar was largely forgotten, except occasionally when people needed a punchline for a joke about failed mascots. But now, decades later, it's time for me to give it a go. The game starts with an intro that's pretty much standard early 90s platform stuff. A peaceful planet has been invaded by bad guys who have captured the planet's legendary hero, or something. So it's up to Ristar, the son of the aforementioned legendary hero, to set things to rights. There's definitely nothing remarkable about the narrative, and honestly I can't say I find anything too appealing about the visual design of the central character. Ristar is basically just a gold star wrapped around a black sphere, plus a couple of arms and legs. There's a certain elegant simplicity to his design, and this title screen is animated rather nicely, but I've definitely seen more interesting character designs. Round 1 is Planet Flora, which follows in the grand tradition of opening levels consisting of pleasant rolling hills and verdant green plant life. Indeed, you might say that this is a zone of green hills. But although the setting is rather standard, the game wastes no time in introducing you to the gameplay mechanic that lies at its heart and sets it apart from its peers, and that's the grabbing. Yes, Ristar has a reach and a grip that would be the envy of any pervert on a crowded train. He can climb, he can swing, he can flip around branches, he can hold on to moving objects and let them carry him along. He can also latch onto enemies and pull them in for a savage headbutt. And I guess that really would hurt, given that he's, a star. Once you've got the hang of it, which doesn't take long at all, this grab ability really is a fun and intuitive addition to the platforming genre. In fact, in terms of cool movement abilities, I'd say it's nearly on a par with Sonic's Spin Dash. It might not be as iconic as that or as flashy, but it is more versatile and no less integral to the game experience, and the whole game is well crafted to make the most of it. This first mini-boss requires you to make good use of Ristar's arms to traverse the arena and also to inflict damage. You can also swing around iron bars like these and then shoot off at great speeds to reach hidden items. Easier said than done though. I don't know if it's just me, but when Ristar's swinging around at maximum speed, it really does unpleasant things to my eyes and my brain. Trying to keep track of his position and let go at the right instant made me feel like I was about to have an aneurysm. The first boss is a relatively simple affair, though it is at least a step up from most Sonic games, in terms of complexity at least. Avoid the obstacles the old guy throws out, grab him for a headbutt when you can, then headbutt the alien thingamy controlling him once it gets knocked off. It's a decent enough first boss, but things get better later on. Round 2, Planet Undertow. And yes, sadly, as the name suggests, it's a water level. If you've watched many of my videos on various Sonic games in the past, you might understand that I've learned to associate water levels in old platform games with pain and suffering. Even the water levels in old Sonic games that weren't terrible, and they were the minority, were still kind of a pain in the ass. But, miracle of miracles, this level isn't too bad at all. Mainly that's down to the fact that Ristar is surprisingly good at swimming, for, a stellar mass. This isn't like Sonic, where the gameplay is basically the same underwater, except agonizingly slow. Ristar can really zip about, not quite with the same agility as Echo the Dolphin, but he definitely seems pretty comfortable under the waves. Actually, one of the first things you find in this level is a secret stage. Apparently there's one in every world, but they're pretty well hidden, and I only found 2 in total. These secret stages give you a strict time limit to reach a special item, and this one at least isn't too tough, as long as your swimming skills are up to the challenge. This was the first and only secret stage I found until right near the end of the game. There are quite a few secrets in this game, and they're often well hidden. The levels themselves aren't huge, I'd say they're on a par with most Sonic levels, or a little bigger maybe. But they do tend to be a little less linear and more tightly packed with obscure little sections tucked away in the corners. In any case, the water elements are used well in this level, with the water level rising and falling, and this set piece where enemies ride in on the waves. Things get a little more labyrinthine later in the stage, with sections that require you to navigate submerged hallways to unlock new passages, and currents that push you backwards and aren't actually as annoying as they are in other games. The boss of this place is perhaps not the best designed of the game's boss fights, but it's still basically fine. A shark swims around, occasionally dashing in from the side of the screen, giving you a chance to deliver a crushing headbutt. Doing so dislodges one of the corks, causing the water level to lower, restricting your movement and making things a little tougher, but it's really not a difficult fight. And so it's on to round 3, Planet Scorch, which is an unsubtle name for an unsubtle place. Yes, this is the fire level. So there is fire, and flames, and lava, and other hot stuff of various types. Pretty much right away you're introduced to another new mechanic, this adorable little Ristar statue that can be used to set off traps and basically act as a decoy. It's not necessarily super helpful, and in fact carrying it around with you is more trouble than it's worth most of the time, especially since there are several of them scattered around the place. The difficulty of the game has kicked up a notch, the platforming is more challenging now, and there are more things waiting to kill you if you mess up. And that's fine, the difficulty curve in this game is nicely balanced. There's a sort of memory test mini-boss in this level where you have to whack the enemies in the given order. It's not the most dynamic bit of gameplay, and actually I'm not sure if it's mandatory, but it gives you an extra life if you get it done, so it's worth it. The next section of this level requires more precision platforming and further reduces the margin for error, but it's all well designed and it really is quite a lot of fun to traverse. The boss is a sort of robotic burrowing armadillo thing. It's not a complicated fight, even when you start plummeting through the air. All you have to do is dodge his claws, but they move quickly and it can be kinda tough. Not exactly an insurmountable challenge though. Next up, round 4, Planet Sonata. I usually love music-themed levels in games, and for my money this may be the best stage in Ristar. Once again, you're immediately introduced to a new gameplay element, a metronome that needs to be delivered to a giant green bird before he'll let you pass. On this first occasion, that's not much of a challenge, but as the stage goes on, more and more obstacles are introduced, and you'll have to utilise fans and grappling claws to get it where it needs to go. There are some pretty nifty puzzle elements here, nothing that's going to strain your brain too much, but it is a welcome change of pace, and honestly I wouldn't have minded if the game had developed this element a bit further. Now, being a music-themed level, you'd hope that the actual music here would be pretty damn good, but I can't really say that it is. It's quirky and distinctive, sure, I'll give it that, but it's not the sort of thing that has me rushing to add it to my playlist of 16-bit classics. And honestly, that's how I feel about most of the music in this game. Which is a shame, because if there's one thing you'd really want from a game even loosely related to Sonic, it's a kick-ass soundtrack. This soundtrack, though, doesn't kick much ass. At best, it gently nudges ass with its toe. It's certainly not bad, it's tuneful and melodious for the most part, but it's not all that memorable, and even at its best it sounds a little primitive, like something from much earlier in the Mega Drive's life cycle. Anyway, the second half of round 4 is more focused on the platforming side of things, and there are some tough sections here. This part, with its narrow vertical jumping bits lined with spikes, puts me in mind of Super Meat Boy. Fortunately though, this is not a one-hit kill type of game. Ristar handles fine, but the gameplay isn't sharp enough to dish out that level of punishment, not without making you want to smash your TV anyway. Like a lot of this level, the boss here is particularly creative. There are two birds, the smaller of which turns out to be an ally who will periodically throw out healing items. The larger bird, meanwhile, flies around throwing out feathers and other hazards, and occasionally dive bombing you. Every now and then the larger bird knocks the smaller bird to the ground and claims his perch, whereupon he starts singing. The music goes weird and he shoots out wonky notes capable of damaging you. It's really rather amusing and certainly one of the more memorable bosses in Mega Drive history. It's also kind of tough despite the extra health bestowed upon you by your bird ally. I suspect I made harder work of it than it should have been, but yeah, I got there in the end. Round 5, Planet Freon, starts with what I have to assume is a deliberate homage to Sonic 3, as Ristar skis down a steep slope. A homage is all it is though, as you actually can't do anything here, and in fact it's possible to skip this small sequence altogether. In any case, this is the obligatory ice level, and once again it's not quite as annoying as you might expect. There are plenty of slippery surfaces, including ones that completely rob you of the ability to move, forcing you to just go wherever they want to take you, but they're not overly frustrating. The mid-level boss boils down to a snowball fight, and this actually did frustrate me, before I realised that if you just stand still, Ristar will start forming a snowball of his own. Before I came to that realisation, I was trying to grab my opponent's snowballs out of the air or steal them from his stash, and that didn't end well. In fact, it didn't end well multiple times, and I lost many lives to this relatively easy boss, leaving me on my last continue. Fortunately, that last continue was enough, just, to see me through the second half of Planet Freon, which mixes water and ice, those two most hated elements of platform gaming, and yet it's still not too bad. A little frustrating, sure, but honestly the slipping and sliding and diving and swimming are ultimately welcome additions to the formula. I wouldn't want them to be used any more frequently than they are, but what's here is just enough to add to the variety of the game without being overused. The boss of this place is another creative one, although it ended up giving me a lot less trouble than the ostensibly much simpler snowball fight. The big gelatinous ice monster jumps around, breathing ice and occasionally munching on frozen snacks, including, if you get close enough, Ristar himself. To win, you have to grab the hot dishes brought out by, I don't know, the butler, I guess, and throw them into the big guy's mouth. It's pretty easy once you get the hang of it. And with that done, we move on to round 6, Planet Automation. But not for long. You see, I was now on the last life of my last continue, and I died about 5 seconds into the level, so I was dumped back to the title screen. And honestly, that's a level of difficulty I'm pretty happy with. Someone like me shouldn't be able to get through this game on their first attempt, even if they did choose the maximum possible amount of continues to start with. And I never felt too frustrated or like I took any cheap deaths, or at least not too many. It feels like the sort of game that rewards skill and knowledge in equal measure, and if I played it as a kid, I suspect it wouldn't have been too long before I was getting through it without losing a single continue. For now though, I'm going to be happy enough just getting through it at all, so let's give it another go. And I definitely, certainly, probably, maybe won't be using save states or anything to make this playthrough a bit easier. Or maybe I will. Who knows? So, Planet Automation. As it happens, this is the last proper zone in the game, and it's a good one. The first half is standard platform stuff. This maze of ever-shifting squares is a great example of how the game is designed around Ristar's grabbing ability. It's really a pretty basic premise. I've seen similar finicky jumping puzzles in plenty of games of this era, but the way Ristar can pull himself around turns something simple into quite a lot of fun. Then there's this section, which makes good use of Ristar's ability to grab onto things and use them to swing himself around. It's good stuff. And the mini-boss here isn't so much one boss as a swarm of these small shelled aliens that you've been encountering throughout the game. Again, it's quite satisfying to pick them off one by one. The final section of the main game is actually a series of individual rooms, each of which has a challenge that must be overcome. There's quite a lot of variety here, from headbutting floating platforms to get them to where you need them to go, to moderately challenging mini-bosses and minor puzzle elements. And right at the last possible moment, I found a second secret level. This one though was a little tougher. In fact, I just could not figure it out. It took me ages to get past the first little section, and I didn't even come close to getting past the second bit. I don't know if it just required a super precise timing or if I was missing something obvious, but I didn't get close to the finish. Oh well, sucks to be me. The boss here took a little while to figure out, but it's another one that's not too tough if you know what you're doing. He has a wide array of attacks, but if you keep up the offense, he'll eventually fall over, giving you a chance to deflect the mechanical arm so it damages him rather than you. And now, all that's left is the epic final fight. Well, there's a bit of platforming to be done first as you ascend the final boss's tower, but it's not too strenuous. And then there's the obligatory mini-boss, a robotic monstrosity that actually goes down rather easily if you just relentlessly leap at him head first. Now there's a strategy I can get behind. The ultimate final boss though is a much more troublesome encounter. This fight's more about patience, as his attacks are avoidable so long as you watch carefully, and the main challenge comes from figuring out exactly when he's grabbable and how to be in range to do so. He also has a really nasty instant kill attack, a sort of black hole that will suck you into your doom but can be avoided by grabbing onto one of the small enemies wandering around. It's a suitably long and challenging fight, not the hardest final boss in existence, but a fitting end to a game that sits roughly in the middle of the bell curve as far as difficulty goes. And so ends Ristar the game. Sadly, it was also pretty much the end of Ristar the character as well. He's made cameos in a few other Sega games, most notably the Sonic and Sega All-Stars racing games, but that's it. And I really do think that's a shame. I wasn't expecting much from this game, but it really surprised me by being one of the most solidly designed and interesting platformers on the Mega Drive. In the final analysis, Ristar seems to me like a combination of the Sonic games and Dynamite Headdy. It doesn't have the variety or sheer creativity of Dynamite Headdy, but it does have a more streamlined and accessible game world that's better designed to make use of its protagonist's abilities. And it doesn't have the speed and polished presentation of the Sonic games, but it does have a more interesting and diverse world to explore. If Ristar had been released a few years earlier, I honestly believe it might still be revered as a classic today. But back in the 90s, a few years was a hell of a long time in game development terms. I'm happy to call Ristar an objectively good game, but in 1995 the world was moving on and Ristar seemed like an antique of a bygone era from the moment it was released. And in many ways, of course, it is. Graphically and aurally, this is very much a Mega Drive game. But there's an elegant simplicity and effectiveness to Ristar's movement system that in some ways makes it seem like a very early predecessor of the highly mobile platformers of today, stuff like Ori, which remains my favourite modern platformer series. I'm almost tempted to say I'd like to see a remake of Ristar, but do I really mean that? What would be the point? It would be cool to see a game that built on Ristar's grab mechanics, but I don't see any real merit to reviving the character of Ristar. I enjoyed his game, no doubt, but as a character I can't say I found him super interesting. He's a star with arms, which is fine I guess, but not exactly such a fantastic concept that it needs to be reintroduced to the world. I'd just be happy if some indie game studio looked at Ristar, took some inspiration from the bits that worked, and then incorporated them into a new original game with modern sensibilities. That could be worth playing for sure. Well, thanks for watching, and apologies again for how long it took me to get a new video out. I'd say it won't happen again, but I don't want to lie to you. Until next time, get off my lawn.